All right. Thank you for everyone that's here today. We are going to have a great learning experience with Jen Manley. Jen believes that kids deserve to do big, meaningful work and that all students are worthy of learning that is fun, challenging, and fulfilling. She is passionate about helping teachers maximize their planning time for what is most important while still providing incredible learning experiences for every student. Jen is with us here now, and you can actually see her live at our ITEC conference this fall, October 21st and 22nd. It's a Monday and Tuesday. Be sure to register so you can meet her in person. She is awesome. I know we talked ahead of time, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her so we can learn from her.
Awesome. Mute. Okay, good now. Thank you so much, Laura. I am so excited to be here and to talk about some ways that we can bring student-led learning into the classroom. This is going to be hopefully an interactive session. So some ways for you to bring in implementation into your classroom, to think about how you might want to um, make changes and tweaks. I think that's for me, the biggest thing about teaching is you can learn strategies and skills from one educator, and how it looks in your classroom might be a little bit different or even a lot different. And that's okay, right? Because we're all sharing best practices, but understanding that the students in our classroom are different. All right. So before we get into it, Laura did a beautiful introduction of me. So I'm not going to do a lot of it, but I think a few things for you to know about me that I think give some context to why I view student learning the way that I do. The first is that I am a career changer. So I didn't start as a teacher. I didn't go to college originally to become a teacher. I actually found teaching because when I sat down and thought about all of the jobs that I had done and what I enjoyed about those jobs, what kept coming up was teaching. So I had led orientation for a restaurant group. I had went and worked with college students, and I got to have these really great, meaningful conversations with them, helping them to grow. And the thing that really pushed it over the edge for me is that I was a volunteer coach for Girls on the Run. And when I was in a job that I totally hated, those 2 hours were the best part of my week. I always looked forward to them. And so when I was thinking about what do I want to do, I decided to go back to school to become a teacher. So I got my teaching certification. I taught middle school computer science, then high school computer science, and now I teach at the University of Maryland. And then I also support teachers on social media, helping them to take back their time, work efficiently, but still be effective as an educator. So if you want to find me on social media, I am at Strategic Classroom on both Instagram and TikTok. I'm also on Twitter. X. I think I'm kind of a lurker on X Twitter. I like to retweet other people and occasionally chime in, but you can find me there at Jennifer Manley. All right, so some goals for today. The first is that we are going to discuss how shifting classroom management to more of classroom leadership empowers students while giving us our time back. So actually, when we help students to find autonomy in the classroom, to own more of their learning, it actually creates time for you. And I think that that's something that people who maybe are not always bringing student-led learning into their classroom, I think, there's this fear that it's going to be so much more work for you. And even though it is on the front end, on the back end, the kids are so much more capable, which allows you to spend time in class supporting students and then also doing some of those other tasks that maybe you do after class because you're actively teaching all of the time. Next, we're going to talk about some ways that we can lead students through authentic learning experiences. I'm a little nervous to talk about this because I have the authentic learning expert on the call, but I'm hoping I can share some cool new strategies. We'll talk about some different strategies to create systems and space in your classroom for student leadership, particularly at the beginning of the year, right? We're having this conversation in August, and you're getting ready to welcome new students into your classroom. Maybe you're watching this and you already have new students in your classroom, but how do we create an environment where students feel safe to have leadership in their learning, right? Because that is a very vulnerable thing, right? Putting yourself in a position where you are willing to take the lead, to ask questions, to have ideas and share out those ideas, that requires vulnerability. So what are we doing to create space in our classroom for students to feel safe to be leaders in their own learning. And then finally, I'm going to give you a toolkit, a resource kit that you can use in your classroom, hopefully implement as soon as tomorrow if you have kids with you right now. All right, so before we get into this, the first thing that I want to acknowledge is that student-led learning is hard. It's hard to manage, it's hard to assess, and sometimes it is a hot mess. The first time that I remember being like, oh my gosh, am I doing it, am I making the right choice, right, to give students more autonomy in my classroom, was I was teaching an automation and robotics class to 8th graders, and I was using Bex Robotics. And if you, yes, I love that. If you have never used Vex Robotics, all you need to know about it is that there are literally thousands of teeny tiny little pieces, and there's probably 30 different pieces, 30 different unique pieces. So I've got like 3 different lengths of screws. They all look the same, except they're like several millimeters longer. It's a lot, right? It's a lot of stuff. And one of the decisions that I had made in my classroom was that I was going to let students have a say in how all of those pieces were organized and how the organization was managed, which is wild to think about. But in order for them to get there, in order for them to be in charge of that component, the classroom had to be a disaster for a little bit, right? So oftentimes, especially as you're transitioning to giving students more ownership, giving students more autonomy, you may experience a hot mess. And that's just part of the learning process. And so I'm not saying that this is going to give you perfect classroom management immediately, right? But to embrace the mess that is part of that process. So one of the things that I want us to shift in our thinking is a lot of times as we're training to become educators, we are told to build great classroom management. And I think that's important, but I would argue that an even better skill to build is not classroom management, but instead classroom leadership. So how are you showing up in your classroom as the lead learner? How are you showing up in your classroom to empower your students? And not necessarily just manage your classroom. So just out of curiosity, and we can share out because we're a small group, or you can drop it in the chat if you don't want to talk. What do you think the differences are between a manager and a leader? And we don't have to talk about this in the classroom setting, but when you hear manager versus leader, what are the differences in those two terms? Being an example for others, yeah, I would associate with that with a leader for sure.
I just think like leaders remove impediments for people to do the work, right? And so a task manager, or I think of a task manager as like laying out all the pieces and like, this is what you do, and directing the workflow is a manager, whereas a leader inspires and removes impediments so that the people that they're leading can make decisions and do the work.
Mhm.
Only thing I'd add would probably be leader assists, whereas a manager tells.
Mm, yeah, and I'm curious, if I asked you in your role, would you prefer your principal to be a manager or a leader? Which would you pick? I see leader being mouthed.
Definitely leader.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, that's a pretty immediate response, right? I mean, I think I asked that question and you all were kind of like, duh, obviously a leader, right? Um, we don't like to be micromanaged, right? We don't like most of the times. Oh, sure, yeah. In certain situations, manager, yes, absolutely. And I think that that's true for education, or for education, for teachers too, right? Like in certain situations, you do need to be a manager, especially when student safety is concerned, right? Where there are rules that absolutely are in place and you're the adult in the room. And so you do need to be the manager. And there are opportunities for us to, like Laura said, get out of the kids' way, right? How can we give them the opportunity to explore things that they're interested in and get them excited about learning and empower them to do bigger work than maybe they even think is possible, right? All right, so we are going to be working out of, I'll put the link in the chat. I put together an implementation plan work document, workbook, if you will. I said I'll put it in the chat. And inside of this, I have the slides linked and then also a resource toolkit. So make sure that you make a copy of that. It is going to prompt you to make a copy. Let's give everybody a minute. Cool. All right. So the first thing that I want to kind of use as a jumping off point for us is this quote from the book, The Self-Driven Child. This book was pretty, I would say, important to me as I was kind of developing in my own pedagogy. And it talks about how do we build students, right, who are or support students in becoming self-driven? How do we get them to the point where they're not necessarily motivated by grades, they're motivated by an intrinsic motivation to learn and to grow? And I love this quote. A healthy sense of control is related to virtually everything we want for our children, including physical and mental health, academic success, and happiness. And in the book, he goes more in depth into this and he talks about how when kids feel in control, they actually are less stressed. So when they and it doesn't really even have to be true control, it's a feeling of control, right? So I like to think of this as a teacher because what I have found in giving students more control is that 90% of the time they make the decisions that I would have made, right? So we're giving them control, but it's really just the perception of control because it's the decision that you would have made anyway. And that's because kids are also intrinsically motivated, right, to be successful. They're intrinsically motivated to be good, right, whatever that means. And so as we continue this conversation, I want us to kind of frame it from this place of thinking about control and the ways that we give kids control in the classroom. Yes, true for adults too, absolutely. Yep. So I'd love to know, you can let me know in the chat. There's also a place in your workbook if you want to capture it there. In what ways is your classroom already student-led? And in what ways do you struggle to give up control? So I'm going to give you, we'll say 2 minutes just to reflect on that. And then if you want to share one of those answers in the chat. Yeah, okay, so I see examples of students getting choice over who they work with and what they get to research read. Yeah, absolutely. Very easy way to bring in some control into your classroom is just to offer choice in terms of group, and choice in terms of what they're researching, what they're reading, potentially what they're creating, right? Which is a little bit more work for you because you're gonna have to figure out how you're going to shift your rubric, how you're going to shift your grading to be able to account for whatever type of project a student creates. Yep. Other examples? On DBQs. Yep. Allie, you're going to love a couple of the resources I'm going to share later. They are perfect for DBQs. Cool. Yeah, and I think that I mean, for things like DBQs, right, letting them just go is important because eventually you know, when they're, I don't know if you teach an AP class, right? But if they're doing a DBQ in AP class, they're not going to have you with them there when they sit down to do that part of that assessment, right? So giving them some control in that aspect is going to help them long term for sure. All right, so we're going to break this down into a couple of different categories. The first is classroom environment, so processes and routines to give students more control. Struggle giving control in the writing process. Yes. Yeah, and I think this comment here talking about giving control in the writing process because there is a particular way that the school or the district wants them to write. Um, it highlights a really good point, which is that sometimes maybe you would give up control, but there's guidelines that you need them to follow too, right? And so in situations like that, maybe thinking about, are there ways that we can give up control in terms of how they're learning this different process for the response rather than in the way they respond itself, right? So, okay, we've got constraints on how they need to respond in this assignment, but maybe the way that they're going about getting there is where we're giving them some space to experiment or to try different things. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is classroom environment. Templates, absolutely, using templates to give them some guardrails. Yep, or sentence starters are also really great. Okay, so before I talk about some of these ideas, because I think some of them are a little bit out there, maybe if you haven't seen them before. The first thing is that all of the work that I do is framed from this place of understanding that students in our classrooms are full human beings in and of themselves. They have preferences, desires, passions, dislikes, opinions, likes, etc. And a lot of times, when students come to school, they are asked to not show up in their full humanity, right? Like they're asked to come into school where there are already rules that exist, right? That may or may not jive with what they want to do. Okay, so they're already doing that, right? They're already being constrained in some ways. And so what can we do in the classroom to accept the fact, right, that they're children coming to school, we have to keep them safe, and allow them to be the fullest expression of themselves that they can be and be able to voice their preferences, desires, passions, dislikes, opinions, interests, etc., and feel safe doing that. So the first way that I do this is I set group norms at the beginning of the year rather than having class rules. So in my classroom, when students come, the first day of school is typically, some sort of STEM team building activity, right? Something that they're not going to be doing in every other class. A quick read of the content of the syllabus, right? And then we get into setting group norms on days 2 and 3. So the way that I do this is I have students come in and they sit down at their table, and the first part of this activity is totally independent. Okay. And what I will do is I'll say, hey, I want you to think about your dream classroom environment. I want you to think about what what classes you've been in that you really excelled in, what classes you've been in that maybe you didn't do as well in or you didn't enjoy as much. And we envision together what their hope is for their classroom. So in the resource folder, you're going to have time in a little bit to dive more deeply into one or more of these strategies, but you've got my slide deck of mind joggers. So what I'll do is I'll go through a series of mind joggers, and students will each have a stack of Post-its. As I'm going over those mind joggers, they are just doing idea generation, right? So this is really a brainstorming activity. And as I'm going through these mind joggers, they are writing down one idea per Post-it, and then as they write down a new idea, they just stick the Post-it on their table. So you can kind of see here, I've got some kids sorting through ideas. They've got the Post-its that they've stuck to the table after writing them down. So step one is we're going through thinking about and envisioning our ideal classroom, thinking about what norms or rules should exist in order to make that ideal classroom possible. And then we shift into some collaborative time. Yeah. So a mind jogger I might give is I might say, think about a class that you really enjoyed. What did the teacher do to make that class so successful? Think about a class that maybe you didn't look forward to going to as much. What could have changed in that class to make it more enjoyable? Think about a class where you maybe were very successful. What norms existed around group work or around individual work that made it possible for you to succeed in that class? Think about your best teacher ever. What are some things that that teacher did to make the learning environment, the way that it was, right? And I might give them some ideas. So I might say, do you expect feedback to be turned around to you in a week? Do you need feedback on your assignment in 48 hours, right? We're just giving them some ideas of what they can think, of jumping off points so that they can write out what their ideal classroom looks like. Yeah, of course. Okay, so after they've independently brainstormed, the next piece of this is that they are going to work with their table mates. And again, you can kind of see this in the picture here to stack and sort like Post-its. So if two students, right, have the same idea or very similar idea, they're going to stack them together. So basically, we've got a group of 5 kids. We are consolidating the Post-its. So we're not looking at 30 different Post-its. After they've done that, they're then going to do the same process, but on the walls. So on the walls, I choose different categories. When I taught middle school, I taught at a PBIS school, and the categories that I used were our PBIS values because the school wanted us to have all of our class rules and expectations inside this PBIS matrix, right? So I had students sort them into prepared, respectful, inquisitive. Yep. So whatever your PBIS values are, I would put up posters or spaces on the walls for each of those values. So now we're using the school framework, but we're making it so that students can have some say. So they're going to sort and stack the Post-its the same way, right? Still just consolidating. And then after they've done that, we do a process called dot voting. So I use, let's see if I have some right here. I usually do. I use those dot stickers. I don't, but you can buy them for like 500, a pack of 500 of them at CVS, the grocery store, whatever. And I just cut it up and give each student 5 dot stickers or 5 little, those gold foil star stickers. But each student and you each get 5 votes. And what they'll do is they'll walk around and they can vote on the norms. So they can vote all 5 votes on one norm. They can vote 1 vote on 5 different norms. They can vote 3 on one and 2 on another. But the idea here is they are putting dots on the ones that are most important to them. After they've done that, we're going to select the majority. And this is why, for me, this is a 2-day activity, because the first day typically takes, it's during, welcome week, if you want to call it that. The first day is they're brainstorming, they're voting. At the break, it allows me to pull the most popular norms and then make a list for students to vote on. So I'm going to pull 5 to 10 of the most popular norms, meaning they've got a lot of stacked Post-its or they've got a lot of dots. And then the next class, we're going to go over each norm and students will vote, yes, I accept, no, I reject, or I'd accept, but it needs to change a little bit. So we're using thumb voting, and we only accept norms that are 100% accepted. So we can have some conversations around any that are kind of that middle ground where a student might say, yeah, okay, I kind of like this idea that we can, I'll give an example, right? That we can eat whenever we want in class. But I think we need to add something to that you always have to clean up after yourself. So we can eat whenever we want in class, but you always have to clean up after yourself. And now we can vote on it, and students are more likely to say yes. We accept the norms that are 100% thumbs up. So if it's not 100%, we don't accept it. Anybody guess why? Why we wouldn't accept it if it wasn't 100%? Yeah. So to me, the biggest shift, the biggest difference between class rules and norms are that norms are upheld by everybody in the group. So it's upheld by everybody in the class. So if we all agreed to it, if we all said, yes, this sounds good, I'm bought in, I'm in, now it's not just me holding kids accountable to the norms, right? They start seeing other, if they see each other not not doing what they said they were going to do, they're more likely to call each other out, right? Because they've all agreed to this set of norms. All right. In your opinion, how is this activity different than you setting rules for students? And do you think you could do both? I want to know why you're laughing, Laura.
I was just thinking about like lobbying for certain rules, you know, like going around like, yeah, wait, this is important, right? Like,
I love that.
I would think just students themselves to see it's something they have a part of. It's not something done to them. It's something they're doing as a group.
Totally. Oh, Allie, let me see. Can I let you? Can we let Allie unmute?
You should be able to now.
Cool.
Okay, I'm here. Um, One thing I teach junior high kids, so I can totally see like what Laura is saying that like, well, we really want to have 15 minutes of free time every single day. And I would be the only one that would say, no, we're not doing that. Um, so sometimes I feel like that's kind of tricky because you could get 100% of the students and then you have a situation like that where it's like, well, we actually really can't do that. So I love the idea, but I get nervous with those like sticky things that they come up with.
Yeah, so I mentioned that I also taught middle school, junior high, and the first year I did this, I had a group of students, one of my periods, who wasted all of their dot votes on Miss Gilbert, that's my maiden name, brings us donuts every Friday. Okay. Which is such a middle school thing, right? Like that's totally a middle school thing. And what's built in for you is where you are selecting the majority, right? So they've gone around and they've dot voted. Now you have all of these norms on the wall. I also, yeah, I also love donuts, but 200 donuts every week is a lot of donuts. So anyway, what I would suggest, right, is that how I framed it with kids, right, is I would say, hey, there are school rules that we have to follow, right? There's certain things that we have to follow no matter what. And there are rules that like you might suggest them, but we actually can't do that, right? It's either a logistical thing, you know, for you, like that 15 minutes, like you're talking about, we got to get through the curriculum. For me, it was money, right? And so if there's any rules that are, I have veto power on any rules that are either not possible or in direct contradiction with a school rule, right? So again, that's you, there's a space in there for you to be the manager to say, right, manager versus leader, for you to be a manager and say, hey, at this point, yeah, even better. It's actually aligned to your content, Allie. I love that. So yeah, so you have a veto position there, right? To say, I want your voice, but if you're going to be silly and waste your votes, like, sorry, right? Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
thank you for reviewing that stage. I missed that in my notes, so thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Um, and then my other question is, how could you maybe use this activity in your classroom that's not norm setting?
I have an idea. We have a weekly advisory day where we get 45 minutes with a group of students. And I would say majority of the time, the lesson that we're supposed to do for advisory takes like 15 minutes. So that I'm left with these kids for another 30 minutes. So we try to find something to do. So I can think like this would be a great opportunity for them to come up with some activities that we could do in the classroom because usually the ones I come up with are super lame, according to them. So if the activity is super lame, then it's on them because they're the ones that came up with them.
I like that. The thing that I really like about this activity is that it is a real world skill. So this brainstorming process is borrowed from like engineering teams. And so I love the idea of using it to select activities. That's a really cool idea. Another way to do it, potentially, right? If you're letting students do group projects and each kid is pitching an idea, you could use dot voting to be able to kind of have that, the best idea, not best idea, but the idea they're going to use kind of populate to the top. So definitely other ways we can use different parts of this, brainstorming strategy where, if you're trying to get them to generate ideas for a project that they're doing or a writing piece that they're doing, we can have them generate ideas on stickies, right? Same sort of thing. Just to get all of it out there. So different ways we can use different pieces that still empower students to have some ownership, right? All right, the next thing that I like to do is peer coaching. So I teach a subject, computer science, that has a lot of projects. And you likely have assignments in your class, if not all of your assignments, where students can be at different places at different times, and might have different needs, right? So not only are they different places at different times, but potentially they're looking at different topics. Potentially some students need more scaffolding than others. Maybe they have different supports. And so I like to use peer coaching for a couple of reasons. Number one is that it helps us tap into higher levels of blooms, right? So when students are teaching, they're getting higher up in that pyramid, right? To be able to explain their learning, teach their learning to somebody else, help somebody else troubleshoot on a particular thing. The second is that it makes it possible to spend one-on-one time with students. So if you empower, peer coaching is when we're going to empower students to coach each other. When we do that, you now are better able to spend one-on-one time with the student that you're with because you are not the only person that's trying to support everybody else in your classroom, right? And then finally, it allows students to get immediate, valuable, and actionable feedback, even if it's not from you. So one of the things that happens when we don't empower peer coaching or we don't have ways for students to get feedback from each other is that we are only one person. And even if we have a small class, even if we have 24 kids in a class, which I've never had 24 kids in a class, literally ever, I've never had 24 kids in a class, but even if you only had 24 kids in a class, if you're teaching a 45-minute period, you're not, there's no way that you're getting to every single kid every period, right? But when we empower peer coaching, every kid can get feedback if they need it in one period. It just might not be from you, right? So the way that I do this, I have rules for peer coaching, and I like make a joke of this. Like I make it a big deal. I show it off to kids. So the rules for coaching for the student, they can't drive. So drive is going and touching the mouse or the keyboard or the materials for the other student. So if you're a coach, you cannot drive. You cannot touch their materials. If you have to, right? If something is wrong and you need to do some like tech support or something, right? You have to ask. So they have to give you consent before you can touch their mouse, their computer, or whatever. Your goal is to be patient and explain what you've learned. You're being put into a peer coaching situation because you are the expert, right? You understand it well enough to teach it. And so your goal here is to be patient, explain what you've learned, and to ask questions if you need help. You want to be the kind of coach that you want your teacher to be to you. To do this effectively with your students, you as the teacher have to be the head coach. So you need to model the same kind of coaching that we expect students to give. So the way that I do this, and like I said, I make this like very silly. It helps that I taught middle school first, I think, because high schoolers still appreciate it, but middle schoolers need it. Is I tell kids to buzz me if I touch their mouse. So I'll say, hey, I'm the head coach. I'm also not supposed to touch any of your materials. If I reach for your mouse, I want you to buzz me. And like literally like, bzz, right? And middle schoolers do it. High schoolers a little more wary about that, right? But I want you to buzz me. Call me out if I'm doing that, right? Call me out if I'm not following the coaching rules that we all agree to. The second piece of this is that you need to recognize strong coaches, but you should do it through other students. So one of the best books I've ever read is called Drive. It's by Daniel Pink, and it's all about the science of motivation. It's so good. And one of the things he talks about is that recognition from our peers means more than recognition from our superiors. So when you have peer coaching, the way that I would do this in the classroom is at the end of class, and I know you said you're a PBIS school. If you're a PBIS school, you can borrow my hack here, because, you know, got to bring in the PBIS, is like, I'll pick a PBIS value and I'll say, hey, you know, I want you to think about today, let's think about respectful, right? Are respectful. Is there anybody who coached you today who you think did a really good job of putting out respectful, or like meeting the PBIS value of respectful? And then allow them to do shout outs. If your school uses PBIS bucks, I would literally let kids, like, have them recognize them. They'll come get the buck and give it to their friend, coach, friend, peer, right? So we're recognizing students, but we're doing it from other coaches and not necessarily just from you, because we know that that means a lot. And then third, keep track of who you help, and then reward them with coaching opportunities. So if I just helped Sarah, like I said, I taught computer science, I just helped Sarah debug her sprite, right? She had this sprite that wasn't moving. I just helped Sarah debug it. If I have another student who needs help with the same problem or a very similar problem, I'm going to ask Sarah to peer coach, even if I'm available. And the reason for that is I want to normalize peer coaching, and it's fresh in Sarah's mind. So this is an opportunity for her to feel empowered. And I'm always there, right? So if they need support from me, I'm there for that. But we're recognizing kids and giving more than just our students who are ahead the opportunity to support. I also give kids the ability to veto, again, using that word, right? But if kids don't want to help, they can tell me that. That's fine. I don't force kids to help if they don't want to. But most kids do, has been my experience. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is a way for you to get feedback and to have kids help shape the classroom throughout the year. So, you know, norms they're doing at the beginning. Now, how do we give them the opportunity to shape the classroom and get what they need at multiple times throughout the year? When we think about student-led learning, it's really important that kids have involvement in shaping what the classroom looks like at more than just one point. Okay. And so we have to ask them. And this is something that might feel uncomfortable if you've never done it before. But I think you'll like the structure that I give. And you also can do this either virtually or you can do it live. I love doing it live because I think, again, that collaborative piece is really good, but you could definitely do it as a Google form. And there's a Google form in the resource kit as well. So I use what's called a retrospective. It's from Agile Project Management. And Laura's laughing because Laura is also an Agile girly. Okay, so the way that I do this is I do it every 4 to 6 weeks, and I make sure that it is anonymous. It's a way for us to evaluate in Agile. It's a way to evaluate a team's process. And I tell kids this. I say, we are borrowing this. It's real world. It's from project management, and project management teams do this to evaluate how they're working together as a team. I want us to evaluate how we're working together as a class, right? How we're working together as a team. I use the same process every time. And the reason for this is because it is less cognitively overwhelming for students. If you're using the same process every time, they know exactly what to expect. And if you're tight on time, it's going to go more quickly when they've done it before. There are actually lots of different retrospective processes. Some people say you should vary it all the time. So I'm definitely not the only voice on this, and I would, look it up and decide what you prefer. But this is why I've chosen to do the same process every time with my students. So the process that I use is start, stop, continue. And we do the same sort of brainstorming situation with Post-its, except this time I'm going to have start, stop, continue on the wall around, and they're not going to vote. So I'm just collecting feedback. So the first thing I ask them is, what activities or actions should our class or the teacher begin doing to move us towards our goal of mastery? If our goal is mastery, what do you need? This could be actions or things that you do in other classes that are really helpful. It could be new ideas that you have that you think the whole class would benefit from, or it could be resources that you wish you had to help you learn better. I actually get really good ideas from students about scaffolds that they need through START, right? Because kids will be like, oh, I need a cheat sheet on XYZ. It's like, yeah, that's a great idea. I 100% will go build that for you, right? Stop is what activities or actions should the teacher stop doing? And I frame this one through the lens of, listen, if this is not working for you, I want to know because I have limited time, right? And you have limited time. And so if something is not working, please be honest with me and tell me because I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste my time, right? And if something's not working, maybe we've got another good idea from start that's going to be better and better support you. And then continue is what activities or actions should the class or the teacher continue doing? So what is working really well? They're going to generate ideas for each of these, put them on the wall, and then you are just going to take that feedback. So we're not having them vote. We're not having them go around and look and add pluses or whatever. It's just a way for you to collect feedback. When we ask kids their opinion, we have to be open to changing. We have to do something about it, right? Because if all we're doing is gathering feedback and we're not making any changes, it is a waste of our time and it's a waste of their time. What's so good about this though, is that we don't necessarily have to implement every change, right? We can have, and usually when I do this, I get like 100 different ideas. I pick 10, maybe. You could pick 3, right? But we're going to go through the feedback and we're going to say, here are the 3 things that we're going to do based on your feedback. So the students know that they've been heard. And you also don't have to implement things that are ridiculous, especially if you're working with middle schoolers. Somebody's going to say something really silly, but you don't have to implement everything. We just have to be willing to make some changes, right? All right, I am going to give you a little bit of time. Oh, we are actually, I lied. I am running late. We'll do this in a second. It is in the workbook. It is in the workbook, so you have it there. I'm going to go over some other strategies and then we'll give you some time to think. I'm so sorry. I tend to do this. Okay. And you know what's funny is that when I was planning this, I actually cut things out. I thought I had pared it down a lot. But we will say just kind of as a wrap up before we move on, what is one idea? I already saw stealing that idea. So Allie, I'm going to count that as yours. That start, stop, continue. But what's one idea that you think you could implement in your classroom?
I just really love that idea of having kids give tickets to other kids because we do the exact same thing. We give tickets out for all of our PBIS stuff. And I've never done it. And it just seems like so silly that I didn't think of doing that. And so I love that idea. And I wrote it in an email to my principal already for our leadership team because I just think that's so great. So
Cool.
thank you.
Yay. I love that. I see Norm's co-creation. Awesome. Okay, the next phase of this is project and learning management. And I'm just gonna talk through them because I'm running low on time. But all of these are resources that are in the toolkit, okay? One thing that I hear from teachers a lot is this challenge that we have with students, which is that it is really difficult for them to manage tasks. And what I want everybody to hear, whether you're live or you're watching this recorded, is that it's not only your students with attention disorders that are struggling with executive functioning, it's actually all of your students because their brains are not fully developed. And the part of their brain that handles executive functioning is not fully developed until I think it's 25. I mean, like I said, I've taught middle through college. There is a distinct difference when I teach college students as compared to middle and even high schoolers, right? And so if we can give them structures to support task management, prioritization, they are going to be more successful and they can use these skills in other settings too, right? So the way that I do this is by having them break down their tasks. And I'm going to show you, I have 2 trackers in here for you, but they break down their tasks. We have them estimate how much time those tasks will take and then rank those tasks by priority. And the goal here is for students to be able to think about okay, let's say I'm doing a project and I have only an hour to work or 45 minutes to work. How much can I actually get done? And what's most important? How can I do the highest value task first? I think this strategy is really good when you're teaching DBQs to students, right? Because they've got to write this big complex thing. How do we break that down, right? You're not just writing an essay. How do we break that down so that, we are going through the sources? We know what we're going to pull from the sources. Next, we're going to, do this paragraph. Then we're going to do this paragraph. So the way that I use these is I have 2 daily work trackers that you can get in that resource folder. The first one, so both of them have ways for students to break down their tasks. And then on the bottom, they have an exit ticket that just asks them to basically think about what they did for the day. So what did I accomplish today? What am I going to work on next class? And what obstacles are in my way? I love this as an exit ticket when you're doing any sort of project or longer term assignment, because you as the teacher can look at that last question, literally just flip through it and know exactly what you need to be prepared for the next day, right? So instead of having to review the whole page, I can just look at the last question and I know what's coming the next day. I'm just going to show a couple of resources that I really like for building teams. So if we're thinking about group projects, and like I said, Laura is an expert at this. So you are so lucky because you have somebody in Iowa that you can lean on for this. But when we think about group projects, I think that a lot of people, we put students in groups, we expect them to just work together, and we don't actually give them enough time to establish as a team. Right? So we put kids in groups and immediately they're working on the project. And one shift that I think you can make that is going to make your team projects work so much better is just giving students time at the beginning of working with a new group to get to know each other, right? To establish co-created norms. Obviously not if you're only working together for one period, but if you've got a group project that's going to extend multiple days or weeks, we want kids to know each other because inevitably there is going to be conflict. Conflict in teams is not a will this happen, it's a when will this happen, right? Because relationships are difficult. Relationships, when there's some stress, which is what happens when there's group projects and there's grades on the line, are even more difficult. And so how do we prepare our students to get to know each other and then be prepared for conflict? So what's in your toolkit? These are both from Laura and I's friend, John Miller. He's the best. So these I've made a little bit more streamlined, but he also has printables and he has some like videos and stuff too. So definitely check his work out. But he uses My World Map. I love it. It's an interviewing strategy. Again, you should, if this is something that is of interest to you, in the toolkit, all the directions are there. But essentially, let's say we have a team of 4. We're going to pair off, so 2 pairs on a team of 4, and each person in a pair is going to interview the other to learn things about their partner. Then they're going to come back together in that group of 4 and share about their partner to the group. And what I love most about this activity, and I don't even know if John did this intentionally, but I just think it is so fabulous because the questions are varying levels of vulnerability, right? So we've got deep things like goals. We also have interesting, like fun, easy topics like fun, passions, interests. What are your strengths, right? Those are easy things to talk about. Values, a little bit harder, but we can give students choice, right? We can say, hey, with your teammate, ask 3 questions. Or hey, before you meet with your teammate, choose 3 questions you'd like asked. So now we've given students some choice. We're letting them control how vulnerable they want to get, but they're getting to know each other on a deeper level than just, what is your favorite sandwich? Which is actually one of my favorite icebreaker questions, but I digress. The next piece of this is also from John. John Miller's Learning Alliance is my favorite group norm creation tool because of one thing that it does that I have never seen any other tool do, and that is in the accountability section. So the way that it works is students will, as a group, they'll come up with their values. Then based on their values, they'll put that into actions. And then when they get to the accountability piece, they're not only talking about what do we do when people don't what do we do when people don't follow the rules? They also talk about what can we do to make it so that it's easier for people to follow the rules? How can we create an environment to where we're all going to just do the thing we agreed to because we all agreed to it, right? So this double layer of accountability, even if you're not using this tool, when you're helping student groups get ready to work together, having them think through both of those things, right? What are we going to do if somebody's off task and isn't following our values? And also, what are we doing as a group so that people are set up for success, right? That's going to change that group dynamic and how they work together. The other piece that you can add in if you're not doing full-blown Agile that I think is really good is at the beginning of each day that a group is working together, they just do a brief stand-up meeting. So 3 questions. What did I accomplish today? What will I work on next class? And what blockers are in my way? It's a good touch point for groups to have so that if they go off and work separately, now we're coming back together at the beginning of each class and we're all on the same page. Yeah, I totally agree, Laura. Another system you can use that I really love, it's called the help ticket system. I actually prefer to do it on a whiteboard, but I've included a digital version in the toolkit as well as like the full system. But essentially on the board, I just put up name and need help with, and here are the rules. And there you've got some of my students using it. First and foremost, before you put your name on the board, ask 3 before me, right? You have to talk to other people. If you're still stuck, you're going to go put your name and what you need help with on the board. The help ticket has to be specific. And if it's an emergency, meaning you cannot move forward, you're going to star your name. The reason that I love this system is because for me, it's basically a command board, right? Because I can look at it, and if there's a star, I know I need to prioritize those students. I also can look at it and see if 4 students have the same problem, because now I can pull a small group and I can help 4 students at once instead of just going to each individual student. I also can quickly see, hey, this student needs help with a Sprite. I just helped Sarah. Now I can assign Sarah as a peer coach, right? So I see this as a visible display of who needs help with what so that I can prioritize and meet as many students' needs as possible. One thing that I hear from teachers when I first introduce this is, well, what if kids don't want their name on the board? And I will tell you that that hasn't been my experience, but it's probably because I've done some of that work on the front end to create an environment where kids are okay feeling vulnerable, right? So they've already created their norms. They've been doing peer coaching. They work collaboratively. So this system, nobody cares if people see if they need help because that's just what we do, right? That's just what we do in class. Another option, like I said, there is that digital version. And so you could, instead of displaying that, you could have that displaying on your computer screen. And that way that's not displayed for everybody to see. All right. Any things that stuck out from this section that you maybe might implement? And it's okay if not.
I liked them all. They're all great.
Love it. Great. Cool. Okay, I know that we didn't have time. Yes, help ticket system is game changing. And I felt, I'll be honest, when I first came up with it, I was like, this is so smart. And then when I started sharing it, I was like, people are going to think I'm so silly for sharing this because it's so obvious. And it's not obvious. So yeah, so I'm really glad that that's helpful. Yeah. Prioritize what they need. Yes, 100%. I always think of this, right? How do we give students skills that are applicable outside of just our class, right? And if we can teach kids how to prioritize, I mean, adults can't do that. Adults are really bad at prioritizing and doing the most important work first. So if we can help kids build that, I think it can be game changing for them. All right, just a couple bonus tips and resources that are in that folder for you. The first is you likely already have students who have 504s and IEPs who get access to things like graphic organizers, right? Or resource sheets. And something I would encourage you to do if you're not already doing it is to set up a resource hub in your classroom that has these organizers and resources available for everybody. And the reason for that is because it normalizes needing support, right? So it's okay that kids need support at different times. There are definitely kids in your classroom that don't have a 504, but would love to have a graphic organizer to be able to organize, their and plan their writing. It also takes away the stigma from the special ed kids, right? Like, which is terrible. But when we normalize it, when we're like, yeah, this is the resource hub, it's there for you if you need it, right? Then it's not weird if there are 3 kids who have them because we've normalized everybody else using them. So I would have a physical tub. You also could put a resource folder inside of your LMS as well. And then the other strategy I want to share, inside that folder, it has both the template and then my example. This is one of my favorite strategies. It's called Mastery Points Before Assessment. And essentially what it is before students take an assessment, they have to earn a certain number of points and they get to choose how they earn the points. So the way that I break this down is into practice tasks and mastery tasks. Practice tasks are worth 2 points apiece. Mastery tasks are worth 4 points apiece. And in order to take the assessment, they need to earn 10 points. So the way that it's set up, and if you use the same template, yours will be set up this way too. They cannot get there by just doing practice tasks. They can get there by just doing those mastery tasks, those like higher level tasks, but it gives students choice. It also allows students to do more, right? So we've automatically built in additional practice. If they don't feel confident enough to take the assessment at 10 points, they've got other options that they can use to be able to continue to practice and then go take the assessment. And if you have kids who are ahead, you already have additional activities that they can do even after they've taken the assessment. So it's just a cool way to be able to offer choice and help students build confidence before they take that assessment. I use it for skills that maybe I'm not doing a full test on, but I still want them to master, right? So an example for me, I use it with binary because binary is a very difficult standard for kids. Learning how to count in binary, they have to translate numbers between binary and decimal. Very difficult for kids. It's not ever going to be a full test, but they do need to master that skill, right? So that's when I use that strategy. Okay, hopefully I have, not hopefully, I have talked a lot. Hopefully you have some really good ideas. The things I want to leave you with. The first is give kids control. Give kids control because it creates student buy-in, because they feel like they are responsible for the work that they're doing and for the environment that they're in. When we do that, it builds intrinsic motivation. So we don't necessarily have to get kids to do something for points or for prizes because they are self-motivated to master the learning, right? Because they feel a sense of ownership over it. And when we're doing this, it can be very easy to say you're doing student-led learning, but not creating systems so that every kid is able to actively engage in the classroom. That's something that I learned teaching middle school, right? Because middle schoolers needed way more support. But as I've taught older students, they need support too, right? My high schoolers still benefited from all of these structures that I was using when I was teaching middle school. So making sure that we're creating systems so that all kids can thrive. Again, I'm so sorry that I ran over, but I would love to know, you don't have deep dive strategies because I didn't give you time to do it, but you can do it at home. Or if you're watching this recorded, go back and pause and actually do this. But I would love to know one actionable commitment. Yes, thank you so much, Allie. One actionable commitment that you have that you could own for this year and hopefully do in the next week or 2 weeks. What's one thing that you're going to do in your classroom? I know Laura said you're gonna share help ticket. Kool-Aid. Jen Manley's Kool-Aid. I love it. Awesome. All right. PLC groups set their norms. Nice. Yes. Retrospectives. I use retrospectives in my adult groups. It's really good. I think when you don't do feedback often, it makes it feel like more stressful than it needs to be, right? Like feedback is just part of the process. Yep, awesome. Putting times in your calendar for the retro. Love that. Okay, any questions that you might have, you can drop in the chat or come off mute. But again, my handles on all my social media. I'm on TikTok and Instagram as Strategic Classroom. I'm on Twitter/X as Jennifer_Manley. My email is jenmanleyedu@gmail.com. And you can find me on the web at jennifermanley.com. I really appreciate everybody being here with me today, especially during the first week of school. I know it's a busy time. So
Awesome. Well, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat, but we are at time, so we will let Jen go on with her day. And thank you for being here, Jen. That was amazing, absolutely fabulous, amazing stuff. And if you guys want to see Jen live in the flesh, come to the fall conference October 21st and 22nd. I know I will be fangirling and listening to her sessions because this is just absolutely great stuff. So thank you guys. And that is a webinar. We did it.